Alright guys, I want to start this video off by asking you one simple question. Let me ask you, how many wrestling coaches do you know around the country, or maybe even the world for that matter, that have had a statue erected in their honor? As a matter of fact, let me ask you this. How many coaches, not just wrestling, but just coaches in general of any sport, have had statues erected in their honor? Well, if you're like me, the answer is I really can't think of very many. But there is one person that I know that has a statue erected in their honor, and that man is none other than Dan Gable. I mean, think about that for a second. This man had a statue erected in his honor outside of Carver Hawkeye Arena because of his tremendous, not just contributions, but impact that he's had on the sport. And I mean, this is some ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I mean, they used to build statues of Julius Caesar and the like, and, so that they could live on for eternity. And this is the honor that has been bestowed upon Dan Gable. And the reason for that, like I said, is because of his tremendous impact. And I mean, this guy, he's still alive, obviously. He had this statue erected. I mean, a lot of times it's done in people's honor, but this guy still, he's active. He's not coaching anymore, obviously, but he's still doing interviews. I just saw that he did a podcast with Joe Rogan, which I thought was pretty cool. And, I know because Joe Rogan, he has millions of followers, and I just thought it was kind of cool that he was on there, because I think what happens is, people, especially in the MMA world, they start to realize and, respect the tremendous athleticism and toughness of wrestlers. And so they start to seek out, let's go find who the best wrestler in the world is right now. And they said, okay, who's that? Jordan Burroughs. Okay, let's get Jordan Burroughs on here, and let's sit him down and talk to him and kind of pick his brain a little bit. And that's what they did. And then they said, they probably asked Jordan Burroughs, Jordan, who's the greatest? Are you the greatest wrestler of all time? And Jordan probably says, he's humble. No, I wouldn't say I'm the greatest. And they say, well, who's the greatest? He, just like most wrestling fans, they probably say, probably Dan Gable. And, and then Joe Rogan probably says, well, let's get Dan Gable on here. And then, Joe Rogan, just like, millions of other fans, as they start to hear Dan Gable's story and learn about his past and, not just his accomplishments, but some of the trials and tribulations that he's been through, his story is so inspiring and intriguing that, you can't get enough. And, personally, I discovered Dan Gable back in 1991. I was in middle school, and there just so happened to be a tremendous documentary that came out, and I'm sure some of you have seen it. It was called Dan Gable, Competitor Supreme. And, like I said, I mean, I was wrestling for, a few years already, but, I was just getting to the age where I was really starting to take wrestling very seriously. And Gable had just so happened to assemble one of the greatest wrestling teams in all of NCAA history in 1991. And, without going into this too much, Gable had already done, a lot. He had already achieved a tremendous amount, both as an athlete and as a coach by 1991. But, he kind of had some ups and downs. And so he basically had come back in 1991, and like I said, he put together this lineup that was just unbelievable. I mean, you had the Brands brothers, you had the Steiner brothers, you had Tom Ryan, I mean, Chad Zapital, the whole lineup. You could go the whole way up through the lineup, and they were just a bunch of studs. I mean, multiple NCAA titles, and so this Dan Gable Competitor Supreme documentary came out, and it was, if you can get your hands on it, if you can see it, I got an old VHS tape. That's where I got it. And if you can find it, I mean, it's definitely worth a watch. I don't care if you're an elementary wrestler, middle school, high school, college, maybe even post-college. I mean, it's definitely worth sitting down and watching. But my point of that story is just that, that's when I really learned about Dan Gable and started to really become a student of the sport. And I don't want to say I'm an expert on Dan Gable, because that's a pretty a big claim, but I've watched pretty much every documentary and read every book that I could get my hands on that had to do with Dan Gable. And so what I want to do in this video is I don't want to just talk about what Dan Gable has accomplished and talk about his life. I mean, that's all been well documented. What I want to do is I want to look at the trials and tribulations and accomplishments of Dan Gable and talk about how he was able to become such an icon of the sport. Maybe, and again, I know I don't like to throw the term GOAT around too much. I mean, we hear it all the time now. This guy's the GOAT, this guy's the GOAT. And, but I think Dan Gable would probably be the GOAT in wrestling. And, the only other person I can even think of that would compare would maybe be Cael Sanderson, and he's still kind of writing his legacy. But, let's just, we'll say Gable's the GOAT because, like I said, nobody has even come close to contributing as much as he has to the sport, whether it be both as a competitor and as a coach. And so what I want to do is I want to go through Dan Gable's life, and I want to kind of break it down a little bit, and I want to talk about what he went through and how that impacted him both as an athlete and as a coach, and allowed him to become so tremendously successful. Because it's almost hard to put into words. It's hard to articulate what Dan Gable has accomplished in this sport. And I don't care if you're an Iowa fan or where you're from. I mean, it's Dan Gable is known worldwide. It's not just Iowa. It's not just the United States, but globally. I remember Royce Alger telling a good story one time, and he said they were over in Russia, and they were in this small village, and it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, very isolated, and the villagers didn't really speak English, and so the guys were there, a group of wrestlers, they're over there competing internationally, and somehow they said, where are you from? And they said, Iowa. And the villagers said, oh, Iowa, Gable. Like they knew exactly, like they knew who Gable was. And, so just like I said, I mean, he's a legend. It's not just in our country, but everywhere, just because of what he was able to do. So with that being said, I want to talk about, Gable's life, and I want to kind of break it down a little bit and talk about some of the adversity that he went through and how he was able to use that and, turn that into basically something positive and turn that into, a tremendous career, both, like I said, athletically and as a coach. So in order to do that, we pretty much need to just start where all legends begin, which is at the beginning. According to Gable's own account, he was involved in a lot of different sports, just like a lot of kids. He played football, he played baseball, he was highly competitive in swimming, and eventually he found wrestling. And it seems as though he had a pretty decent amount of natural ability. He had a lot of success as as an elementary wrestler. He worked hard, and one of the advantages that he seemed to have as a kid was he had a great imagination. And I know a lot of kids have great imaginations, and that would sort of continue on throughout his career, and it would eventually turn into the ability to visualize. And so Gable was, his career started off and he was having success. He was winning a lot more than he was losing. But then tragedy would strike, and according to the story, Gable and his mother and father had gone away for a weekend fishing trip, and they had left his older sister behind, and she was staying home by herself. And at one point, Gable's dad called home to check in, and there was no answer, and he had a neighbor go and check, and unfortunately, his sister had been tragically raped and murdered in their home. And I'm not going to get too much into the details. It's been well documented. I'm just going to say that, it struck a tremendous blow to the family. And there was a whole host of emotions, according to Gable, things like anger, guilt, blame. And the question became, how do we move past this? And, it was just such a tremendous display of maturity for a younger kid when Gable would say, not only are we going to move past this, but I'm going to move into my sister's room and I'm going to dedicate my entire career to her memory. And Gable said that, not only did this honor his sister, but it also helped keep his family together. His mom and dad were, beyond grief. They were beside themselves, and they simply were not quite sure how they were going to move past this. But what happened was Gable took his career and he turned that into the focus of his family. And he took an already pretty successful youth and high school career, and he turned it into a tremendously successful high school career. He ended up his high school career undefeated, winning multiple state championships. And his family life was centered on his wrestling. His father and mother were extremely proud in his accomplishments, and it gave the family something positive to focus on and to help them get them through that tragedy. So Gable took that tragedy and used wrestling to overcome the grief, and that tragedy also helped to transcend his career into another level of success. And his focus became not simply about winning wrestling matches and doing well, but it became a focus of keeping the family together through wrestling. A family friend would say that Gable at one point, the guy was a sports writer in Iowa, and he said Dan Gable came to him and said, "Harry, I must win. It's not I want to win, it's I must win." And that became his mindset. That became his mentality. And what that did was it drove him to work even harder. And his focus became on outworking his opponents. And Gable got to a point where he wasn't just winning wrestling matches, but he was dominating. And that would go on throughout his collegiate career. And so the foundation of Gable's success became hard work, and that would carry on for the rest of his athletic career, and not just his athletic career, but even into his coaching career. Hard work would become the cornerstone of Gable's philosophy. And then, the Gable success train continued to roll, and his senior year, heading into the NCAA tournament, there began to become some rumblings. And those rumblings were caused by a young man by the name of Larry Owings from Washington. And he basically came forward and said, not only am I going to compete at the same weight as Dan Gable this year, but I'm going to beat him. And he kind of pulled some Muhammad Ali tactics on Gable. And they kind of started to work. Gable, by his own accord, would say that he started to, reporters started to ask him, Dan, what do you think about this Owings guy? He's saying he's going to beat you. And Gable was kind of like, wait, who? But they kept asking, and then eventually he started to kind of take notice, and he started saying, why does this guy think he can beat me? And, again, it started to get into his head a little bit. And, this video's out there. It's on YouTube, and maybe I'll link it in here. But, the match came down to the finals. I mean, they were 1 and 2 seed. And, but I guess the story was that Gable seemed to be untouchable. And now for some reason there's this guy who's saying that he's figured Gable out and he can beat Gable. And Gable himself started to wonder what was going on. And so if you watch the match, I mean, it's a barn burner. It's back and forth. It's, scoring on both sides. And the score ended up, it was a high-scoring bout, 13-11. And when the final buzzer rang, Gable came up short. And, it's just so ironic that it was his final collegiate match. And, he lost, and nobody thought it would ever happen. And so tragedy struck again, and, Gable said he felt like he not only left his mom and dad down, he not only left his teammates down, but he left his sister down. because his career had been dedicated to her. And so tragedy strikes again, and Gable didn't know how he was going to move past this. But ironically enough, it was tragedy that would catapult Gable's wrestling to another level.